Hello, Mrs. Obama, and thank you very much for giving this interview to Brut on the occasion of the release of your book in France, Cette, lumière, nous, published by Flammarion. In the very first pages of the book, you explain that this book is not a how-to manual, that you don't have a magic formula and you don't claim to have all the answers. And I think that your readers will be surprised to discover that you are plagued by many anxieties, many doubts, and you show us the woman behind the icon. And I have to say that I was very relieved to see that you too can lose your temper with your kids and spend a whole night wondering if you're good enough. So I wanted to know, do you feel that empowerment is also about sharing our fears and sharing about our weaknesses, freeing ourselves from this desire of perfection that drives us?
Absolutely. I think that that is the hallmark of authenticity and vulnerability, particularly as we're talking to young people, people who are looking to us. Sometimes it's easy to feel like as a role model, your job is to have all the answers, to show no weaknesses. But I think that just sets an impossible bar for those looking up to you to reach, when in fact it isn't true. We all struggle with fear. We all go through bouts of depression. All of us wonder whether we're good enough, whether we're prepared for the positions that we're in. I know for me, admitting it it's a source code to my power. It's, being able to point out my differentness and to own it and to rewrite a story of why those differences, that differentness has made me who I am, rather than trying to hide that or carry around a mask of pretending that I'm perfect when perfection is never the goal. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us who have a platform to be honest as much as we're able to about the challenges that we face and how we overcome them.
And you were just speaking about role model, and in France this notion of role model is not as popular as in the United States. But in the reality, many people here have few or no models to identify with. And the truth is also that we don't measure enough what it is to be sometimes the only one in the room. So why do you think it matters to have role model, and why is it also so important to reconsider who are the heroes?
It is difficult to envision being something you don't see. And perhaps that is something that's lost on people who take for granted their image is being part of the norm. There are people who are fortunate enough to see themselves everywhere, on the covers of magazines, on television. I don't know what that feels like, because I am a Black woman. I am tall. There is so much about me that is not reflected in modern culture. So I can't imagine what it feels like when you do see yourself. But when you don't, there is it weighs on your psyche. It makes you feel like somehow your story doesn't matter. And I think that's part of what creates uncertainty. I think slowly but surely more of us feel, unfortunately, marginalized. We feel unseen. We feel like there isn't a clear pathway for us to take because we don't have role models. I think those of us who are onlys, who are the people who are different in the room, it's incumbent upon us to come there with our full selves, to rewrite the story of not mattering and to shape it in our image, to let people understand this is what a tall Black woman sounds like. This is what keeps her going. This is what keeps her alive, because you never know who you're going to touch, who's going to see that. What little girl will look up and go, I see myself. I know I can get to that place because someone like me has done it before. So I think we can't take for granted the importance of broadening the spectrum of who matters, whose stories are important.
And in this book, you seem very concerned about the younger generation. Very often you address this younger generation, and you seem concerned also about the consequences of COVID on this younger generation, a generation that suffers from loneliness and from depression and anxiety. Many of them lost faith in us, and they lost confidence in the future. How can we address that? And do you think it will be possible for them to be comfortably afraid, as you say it in the book?
Yeah, I do worry about this generation because of this protracted period of loss and isolation as a result of quarantine. They're experiencing something that none of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. So we have no idea what the outcomes will be as a result of this extended isolation. You couple that with the fact that this generation, unlike mine, unlike ours, is very dependent on social media. They've become more and more accustomed to developing relationships over a phone. They've gotten used to technology, dependent on it in a way that I have not. There are good things that come from social media, but we also don't know what those consequences are, how much that has to play into these unprecedented levels of isolation and anxiety that these young people are feeling. So we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. But what I do know is this, that children are no different from us. They are craving to be seen. They want to know that someone recognizes who they are. And that, as I talk about in the book, is in the chapter that I call Starting Kind, that we have to understand that the words that we express to the children in our lives matter. We need to greet them with a level of gladness and enoughness, because oftentimes that's where their self-worth begins. It begins with the interactions that they have with the adults in their lives. That's why as First Lady in the White House, I spent so much time with children, because I knew in my heart that many children in their entire life had not felt seen. So opening the doors to the White House, giving kids a voice, to me was sharing my light with them so that they'd have something to hold on to as they worked through the challenges that will inevitably come their way, whether it's a pandemic or a lagging economy or loss, disappointment. We have to ground them with a sense of purposefulness, and we have to show them in every interaction that we see them. And I think that's critical to their continued development and their ability to become all that they can be.
And actually, speaking about loneliness, I was very moved by your chapter about friendship. You talk about how essential friendship has been in your life as a student, as a young mother and lawyer, and as a First Lady also. And how important it is for you to bring together around the kitchen table people from different backgrounds, different generations. But you seem worried that as a culture, we've fallen out of practice with developing friendship. Can you elaborate on this, and can you explain what is this concept of the kitchen table?
Well, I am surprised by the number of early readers to this book who hone in on this chapter, because many of them say they don't have friends. And why? Because I'm usually talking to busy women, women who have prioritized everything other than themselves. They have fabulous careers. They are helicopter moms. They are holding their families together. And if we don't prioritize friendship, which I think a lot of women in particular, although I don't think it's unique to just women, then it is then you look up one day and you don't have any. My community of support, much of that support comes from other women, has been an essential tool for me. As I describe it, my kitchen table. I use that metaphor because in my house growing up on the south side of Chicago, the kitchen table was the place that everyone gathered in the small little apartment that was on Euclid Avenue. That's where we worked out all of our issues while my mother cooked dinner. That's where all my friends came during lunch hour break to talk through the woes of the day. It was a space where you felt like you could take off your mask and be fully yourself, and you could be seen and heard. And so for me, having a table like that, a safe place to go where you can share your experiences, where you can let down your guard, where you can be lifted up again, and recover from the wounds of the world, the fights of the day. You can come and lay your weapons down and just be. That is critical. And I think that if we're not prioritizing friendship, as trivial as it may sound to people, maybe even to the people listening, what's a friendship? If you have a great career and you're earning a salary, later for friends, right? Well, I think that we cannot take that community building for granted, and we can't get out of the practice of being intentional about not just making friends, but sustaining them over long periods of time. And I talk about that. I spend an entire chapter talking about how my table has been a resource to me over these years.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very beautiful chapter. And I'm going to ask a question that I think a lot of people ask you. It's about this motto, this expression that you used on the convention stage in Philadelphia in 2016. When they go low, we go high. It's a call, of course, for dignity and courage. But today, ecologists and feminist activists, they believe that we can no longer wait. And they believe that in the face of emergency, maybe we must use more radical or even violent methods. So how do we continue to fight and to fight with dignity when women's rights and minorities' rights are threatened by lies, by manipulation, and by very undignified methods?
That's one of the reasons why I, in the book, focused on that chapter, that question of what does it mean to go high? Because I think that after I said it on the convention stage, it became a slogan almost, a motto that people put on T-shirts and on coffee mugs, and they repeated it over and over again. But what was missing was an understanding that a motto, a slogan, means nothing without action. Going high doesn't mean be complacent. It doesn't mean to ignore the pressing problems that we face, to accept injustice, and to just sit by idly and be dignified in the process. For me, going high is turning that rage into action. Actionable plans with a clear strategy have to go along with the motto. They have to go along with the words. I quote John Lewis, our late congressman, who says that freedom, it's not a state, it's an act. It's not some enchanted garden up on the hill where finally we go to sit down and rest. It requires us to work and work smart and to be strategic about our plans. That's what the civil rights movement was all about. We talk about the March on Washington, but the March on Washington was just the cherry on the sundae of change. There were plans to change laws. There were boycotts that lasted for years. And so what I would urge the younger generation to do is to think about plans that are not just going to be born out of rage, but are actually going to lead to change. When I think about going high, I think, am I speaking to my rawest emotion, or am I speaking truth that will lead to actual change? It's that long-term approach, what will be the end result of my action? Will it open people's minds? Will it lead them to understand me more? or will it just lead them to fear me more? So I go into that in great detail, and talk about how, the generation today, as all generations do, they look on past generations and they say, I wouldn't have done it that way. Maybe it was too slow. How long do we wait? How radical do we become? But in the end, I think that integrity, dignity, patience, determination, and planning is the key. That doesn't become unfashionable ever.
And you say also that writing is a way to go high. And this is your second book in 2 years, and you are an excellent storyteller. And do you think that it's also for you a way to challenge these old narratives of the United States and to try to tell another story?
Yes, and yes, I think the more that we tell a broader story of what it means to be American, the more of us who get the platform to rewrite, as I said early, the story of not mattering, the better. We are in a time when where what we say and whose stories get told, what history is remembered, becomes important. We are fighting tooth and nail in this country over whose story gets told and how, what history matters. That affects the future, what the next generation understands, the context that we move forward in. So whenever I have an opportunity to spend some time really dissecting my own personal thoughts and experiences and adding that to the mix, offering that up as a point of conversation, I try to as much as possible. Again, as you started out by saying, I do not believe I have all the answers, and this book is not intended to be that. It is a look inside my toolkit, as I say, and I want this to be the beginning of a set of conversations about what it means to go high. How do we productively make change in our country? How do we stay vigilant but effective in the work that we do? How do we overcome our fear? How do we deal with feelings of invisibility and loss? All of that is an offering. And so what I want people to do is put their tools on the table as well. Let's see how resilient we are, what we're already working with. How long does it take you to get to the point where you know yourself well enough to know what works for you and what you need to change? That's what I'm offering in this book.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Obama, for this conversation. So your book, Cette, lumière, nous, Flammarion. Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Thank you.